Elon Muscular, and in this video I'm going to teach you guys something super interesting. This is something that not a lot of people know, something that I've been doing research about for honestly years, because I've been fascinated since I started bodybuilding with Golden Era Bodybuilding. You know, Arnold Schwarzenegger, Franco Columbu, Frank Zane, Robbie Robinson, Tom Platz. How did these guys look like that? They had such a different look than the bodybuilders today. And I just found their physiques so much more fascinating, and the way that they marketed them was just appealed to me so much. I really like how they talked about the bodybuilding lifestyle and how they just worked out, ate right, trained hard, you know, took the right amount of stuff, and everything just came together. I feel like the Golden Era didn't have this like weird dark energy that kind of surrounds some of the hardcore bodybuilding today. They seem like they just had a much healthier mindset about it. So I really want to understand, you know, how did they do it? What were their methods? And as I dove further into Golden Era bodybuilding and learn more about the guys, I started to realize that pretty much everything they did was just based off like their intuition and their passion for doing things. Like, they were the pioneers, so they didn't have a lot of information. We have so much science nowadays that they did not have. We understand how these things work where they did not. They really were just eating what they felt like was causing them results. They were training in a way that they thought was working, and they were taking the drugs that were available at the time. It was really just practical application at its most basic. None of them really, until, you know, people a little bit later in the 80s and 90s were really trying to quantify what they were doing. They were just doing it. And out of that came magic. And that is like the fantasy and mystique of the Golden Era. But I've tried to look back in time, you know, see what they said, see what they did, and quantify it for you guys so we can understand what they did, so that we can mesh it with modern information that we have and build our own Golden Era physiques, which is my goal because I really love how those guys look. So in this video, we're going to talk about how they dieted, which is different than what we do today, how they trained, and we're going to talk about what performance enhancing drugs they used and which performance enhancing drugs were available to them and how they looked at them. And I think that that's actually really interesting. So honestly, what I want to do in this video is just dive into it because I'm super passionate about this, and let's just get it out of the way and let's talk about performance enhancing drugs first. You know, this is what I would click on the video for, honestly, because this is what really was different from then to now. So right now, what bodybuilders do is they take a lot of testosterone. Most bodybuilders now take a lot of testosterone. That is going to be the basis of the performance enhancing drugs that they use. And they also take growth hormone and insulin. That is going to be like the foundation of a modern bodybuilding protocol. If you go to like a top coach and you want to become a professional, that is what they're going to lay out for you. They're going to give you testosterone, growth hormone, and insulin, because these three things work in a synergy. They're the biological hormones, which we know that now. They didn't know too much about all that stuff back then, but they work in a synergy to grow muscle like nothing else. So that's why guys are so much bigger today, because they have access to the synergy of hormones, whereas back then all they had was basic anabolic hormones. They didn't have growth hormone. They did not have insulin. Well, they had them, maybe they were available, but they didn't know about them, they didn't use them in a bodybuilding context, right? So that's going to be the major difference when you look at guys back then and you look at guys now and you say, why was Arnold Schwarzenegger 230 pounds on stage, but Big Ramy is 290 pounds on stage? The big difference there is going to be that, you know, Big Ramy takes not only more anabolics, but also more other drugs as well. So diving a little bit deeper into that, not only did they not use growth hormone and insulin, but they also had a different strategy when it comes to anabolics. So like I said, in the modern times, we use testosterone as pretty much the basis of the cycle. So the rule of thumb that a lot of people believe, which is totally not true, is that you have to have double the level of testosterone than any of your anabolics. So if you're taking 300 deca, you should be taking at least 750 test to counteract the side effects, and that having a lot of testosterone will allow you to take some anabolics in a lower dosage. So testosterone is typically the highest thing in cycles, and pros take, you know, anywhere from a gram to 2 grams of testosterone and maybe 500 to a gram of anabolics in the off season. That would be normal for them. But in the golden era, bodybuilders actually frowned on the use of testosterone. I know this might sound crazy because it is so much the basis of everything we do now, but they actually looked at testosterone as like a dirty drug. They didn't look at it as a bodybuilder's drug. They were interested in the cosmetic effect of the drugs and how they added nitrogen retention to the muscles. And testosterone, they felt like, you know, everybody knows testosterone can lead to more side effects like hair loss for some people, gynecomastia for some people, just like a rougher look to the skin and stuff like that. That's not really something that we concern ourselves too much nowadays as bodybuilders. But back then they were so image focused and creating the perfect look. For some reason, testosterone did not fit in there. So actually the primary anabolic they used was decadurabolin. And most of them will say that they used it in very low dosages. But there is obviously a good amount of, you know, anecdotal evidence that they did not use it in low dosages. And if you look at the physiques from back then and how muscular you were, you just put 2 and 2 together, you can understand that they did not use anything in low dosages. They used between 2 to 3 grams of anabolics for, you know, pre-contest as well as off-season, just the same way that people do today for the most part. But again, the difference was they didn't have growth hormone and insulin, so they couldn't reach those crazy sizes. But even the size that they did have wouldn't be possible on, you know, 300 milligrams of Deca and 2 D-ball pills a day. It's just not possible. So just throw out of your head that they used low dosages, because they didn't. The pro bodybuilders at the time used plenty of stuff. And what they used was decadurabolin, Anavar, D-ball, Winstrol, and Primobolan. I hope I'm not forgetting anything. And then later on the scene, they had Parabolin, which was French Trenbolone, which was actually the original pharmaceutical Trenbolone. But that came a little bit later, like early 80s. If we're talking about like 60s, 70s, it was Primobolan and it was Deca. And then for the orals, it was the, you know, D-ball, Anavar, Winstrol, Anadrol. So Arnold Schwarzenegger was pretty open, and a lot of people talk about this, that he loved Primobolan and D-ball. That's pretty much all that he used. So Primobolan and D-ball to cut up, and just like a ton of Primobolan, maybe some Deca to cut down. They actually viewed Deca as a cutting drug. And there's actually a book by, I think, the doctor that was supplying all of them, named Robert Kerr. And the book is like called like Practical Application of Anabolic Steroids or something like that. And he talks about Deca like it's trend. He talks about Deca like it's a cutting drug. It's something that people use pre-contest to add definition to their muscles. And if you ever use Deca only, alone, without testosterone, you would see that it does kind of have that effect, especially as you're leaning down. Helps the muscle stay full. It actually helps you get a more full look while you're dieting, which I guess they viewed as, you know, muscle sparing and good for cutting and stuff like that. So they viewed everything completely differently than we do now. Now, when we use Deca, we use it with testosterone, and it pretty much serves like the same purpose as just like adding more testosterone, but we're just want to get it from like a slightly different pathway. And when you pair them together, that's when you get like that, you know, big bloated look like I have right now. I'm taking testosterone and Deca, right? And that kind of became like the staple for bulking up. But when you take it on its own, it doesn't act the same way that it does when it synergizes with testosterone. So you can see, if you look at the physiques, you can see the difference in them versus people now. You can see, if you know what it looks like, how the Deca, Primobolan, and Winstrol come together to get that contest look. Okay, so off the top of my head, that's everything I could think of on the big difference of why they look the way that they do pharmacologically versus guys today. Now let's talk about the diet. So a lot of them back then liked to eat low carb, and then the ones that didn't eat low carb ate low fat. So those were pretty much the two dieting mediums. It wasn't really common that somebody had like a mixed diet. It was either like a low carb dieting or low fat dieting, and those are the two popular ways to diet. So because for them it was very important to stay within a relative condition year round. That was like the culture back then. They had photo shoots all the time. They were always like on call as bodybuilders, especially the guys in Venice Beach. So they always wanted to stay in shape. And the guys, like, there was a guy, Ken Waller, who liked to dirty bulk, and they would be like, oh, this guy, like if someone liked to dirty bulk, it was like a rarity. Most guys like to stay in shape. That was the culture. So that's why most of them were kind of like on a diet year round. And that's probably another reason why they didn't get super big, because a lot of them didn't really push the food that much, right? They might have pushed the drugs, but they didn't push the food that much. They pushed the training, but the food always remained kind of within that like maintenance sort of range. And then when they would diet, they were known to actually cut down the food a lot. So they would cut down to just tuna and lettuce or something like that to get in condition. So they weren't as smart with like manipulating macros. They didn't really know how to count macros or count calories. They just like ate things and then saw how they looked and then ate a little more, ate a little less based on how they were looking. They didn't have like that long-term plan of like, I'm gonna bulk for 6 months and I'm gonna do this for this month. Like, it wasn't as regimented as that. They just didn't have the information to know that getting a little bit fat would help you put on more muscle. Really, like, some guys felt like that intuitively, but other guys felt like you didn't have to do that, and there just wasn't a lot of data. So everyone was just kind of doing their own thing. So like I said, the diet's like either low fat or low carb. They thought that fish thinned the skin. They thought that eating too many carbs, some guys thought that eating too many carbs would make you fat, but then other guys realized that you could eat a ton of carbs and not eat any fat and still get lean. Like Tom Platz was known to diet on like Pop-Tarts and like tuna fish, you know what I mean? He realized that carbohydrates didn't make you fat, they actually filled up the muscle. So the dieting was all over the place, and it just was not very well informed in the 60s and 70s. So in terms of training, they pretty much all trained high volume. High intensity training wasn't a thing until Mike Mentzer popularized it in the 80s, but that was after he competed pretty much. So while he was competitive, he didn't really do or talk about high intensity training that much. For the most part, in the 70s and 60s, it was all high volume training. And the reason that it worked so well was because of the anabolics. We know that for naturals, it's actually better to train at high intensity closer to the failure limit. But for people that are enhanced, they can get away with doing less weights for higher volume and still have the muscles grow. Because enhanced muscles will grow off less. They don't need to be as high intensity. They don't need to be as close to the failure point in order to grow. So somebody who's enhanced could train with like 60% of their max, do a ton of reps, and the muscle will still grow. Where someone as natural is not going to get the same results. So these guys were all enhanced. They were all taking a lot of stuff. And they trained with just like crazy high volume, and they trained their asses off. They didn't know where the limit was. So they trained like twice a day, every day, took the gear, ate the correct food that they thought was healthy and enough, and listened to their bodies. They all had good genetics, and that's just what contributed to the look at the time. It's really hard to like quantify it because it was so, they can't communicate it. And if you listen to any of them, like, they cannot communicate this information to you in a way that you can understand and follow their plan. That's why like a lot of them didn't move on to become like big name coaches and stuff like that. Like, they couldn't really tell you like how it worked. It was really just passion. It was really just a mix of a lot of things coming together at the time, experimentation, and that created these beautiful works of art. Now, one thing though that they had that a lot of guys don't have today is the artistic mindset. So they didn't look at it so much like a science like we do today. They looked at it like art. So I'm trying to add, you know, a peak to my biceps. What if I turn it like this? What if I turn it like this? So what is going to cause that, you know, addition to the sculpture that I'm building? They viewed it like that. So the training was so much about like visualization, understanding the feel and stuff like that. Whereas right now, we're so much based in like progressive overload. We're so much based in these rigid principles that we understand that kind of intuitive form of training and dieting has kind of gone out the window. And I think that's why physiques look the way that they look now. Like, we grow faster now than they did before because we understand bulking, calorie surpluses, progressive overloads. Before, like, you know, Arnold, for example, he would hit like his whatever weight that he was pretty much at like 22, 23 years old, and then just pretty much like stayed around that weight while he was winning all of his Olympias and just like refined it. It was more like that classic physique sort of mindset that the guys have now. Like they didn't have a weight cap, but they had like this abstract cap because they didn't have growth hormone and insulin. They didn't understand like these principles to push weight up really. So it was just kind of like where genetics and drugs and passion and training left them is how they looked. And weirdly, that just happened to look awesome based on the crop of guys that was around at the time. And they had so much charisma, and because they were not focused on the science so much, they were focused more on like marketing, presentation, posing, you know, artistry, and that is what created that mystique kind of around the time that they're still trying to replicate today with classic physique. And I think that a lot of the classic physique guys are learning these things and mixing that approach with the modern day approach, and a lot of their physiques would dominate if they were back in that era. If you really look back and take off the rose tinted glasses, you'll see that, you know, there were holes in a lot of these physiques. Like they wouldn't stand up to bodybuilders well today because of the approach that they took. You know, they weren't always so lean when they went to competitions. They had sometimes lagging muscle groups because they didn't like them and they didn't focus on training them as much. The physiques were a lot more like rudimentary in terms of bodybuilding standards, but they were a lot more advanced in terms of like, I guess, artistic standards in a way, which is why we're still trying to chase that energy that they had at the day. So I hope this video was informative to you guys. I hope that you understand what I'm saying here. I think that the enhancement bit is very important to understand and very interesting, but also just the artistry and the mindset if you really want to build a classic era physique and a physique that stands out from the rest of them. That is your physique, something that you built, something that is uniquely you, not just a good physique that does well in a lineup, but something that represents who you are as a person. That's what I feel that the Golden Era really did well, and that's what I'm kind of trying to do. And a lot of people who are not, you know, bound by the stage have the opportunity to do that nowadays. So I think that it's something that's beautiful to chase. I don't think that we necessarily have to use the same methods that they used because they were not as informed as we are. We can get to where they got easier and better and more effectively and efficiently with the science that we have, but we just want to try to understand their mindset so that we can create that same illusion and vision and excitement that grows the sport, grows bodybuilding, and helps other people get a passion for it because it's very relatable, it's very enticing. So I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Check me out on Bodybuilding Lifestyle Podcasts, everywhere that podcasts are, Physique Mastery Program. If you want to work with me, follow me on YouTube, Instagram, blah, blah, blah. Thanks for watching, guys. Peace.